of us are old enough that we were managing organizations through the last recession. And, there were similar challenges that popped up, particularly around, budget and being asked to do different things and things like that. But I think we all knew it was temporary. We just had to, manage our way through it and get to the other side. This doesn't feel temporary. What the workforce wants in terms of rewarding, profession or career, that balance or integration maybe is a better word of work and life. This isn't temporary. These are permanent changes to context and expectations for work.
Hey, Loren, are you ready for another episode of Campus Confidential?
I am totally ready.
And I think this might be I know, our last episode of this season.
The last one. Yeah. It's exciting.
It is.
We did it.
Season 2. We did it. It's always fun when we have milestones. I like a little milestone closure, making it through
now,
life.
To be fair, like I don't know how many episodes it is, but it's sort of like the streaming era episode. Like it could be 8 shows, right, on Hulu or something like that.
That's fair. We didn't make it a whole nother year yet.
Right.
Well, so we're going to have a season 3 in year 2. but we'll tell people about that in extra credit. So this is your note that you have to stay to the end, or at least fast forward to the end to hear what we're doing.
And you can't skip commercials on this podcast. Like you cannot, like on streaming.
Do we have commercials?
I don't think so.
Okay. I didn't think so.
We'd have to have sponsors first.
Dang it. Okay. So if anyone knows someone that wants to sponsor us, we're available. So we have 3 guests. So podcast party, and they're all the 3 executive directors or CEOs, presidents of the associations that help sponsor our research with E15. So, Loren, I will let you share who they are officially, but I will just make a note. When I was in my role at NACIS, these are 3 of my favorite folks. They come from different backgrounds, but they all really are dedicated to helping move the needle on higher education and association work and that combination. And they're just really fun to be around. So I appreciate them. Yeah, old cohort. Feels good every time we're in conversation with them. So I hope that comes across for folks.
Yeah.
So
I recall one time, I think we were in DC for something, Kelsey, but I ended up at the end of the evening, I think I tagged along or inserted myself into the 3 of you being somewhere for an after dinner drink or something. I probably didn't belong there. I'm not an association exec, but I could tell this was also this was the mutual therapy group managing higher ed association. So my lips are sealed. I'll never say anything, but it was eye-opening and fun.
What happens over gin stays over gin, even if you're a guest. Yeah. So tell everyone who the 3 people are.
Yes, wonderful. Our first guest was Mary DeNiro, the CEO and Executive Director of ACUHO-I since 2015, I believe. ACUHO-I, for listeners, is the association home for campus housing professionals. She has previous campus experience. She was the Chief Engagement Officer for the University of Wisconsin Foundation and Alumni Association for 17 years, so a long time on campus. And prior to that, Senior VP for Sales and Marketing at Capital Newspapers and VP for Advertising for Thompson Newspapers. So it comes out of the journalism and media world. ACUHO-I, for those who might have forgotten from previous mentions, has 1,400 members, represents 17,000 professionals, and, as they like to say, 1.2 million students who live on campus. Our second guest was Pam Watts, who's the Executive Director of NIRSA. This is the Professional Home Association for Leaders in Collegiate Recreation. She's been there since 2012, and she joined that association in 2000 as the Chief Finance and Strategy Officer. And prior to that had been in private industry, private business as a public accountant in the finance area. Again, let me just mention that NIRSA has 3,500 members on over 900 campuses in the U.S. and Canada, and has 2,000 volunteers serving 10 million students who participate in some form of recreation in higher education across both of those nations. And then finally, Mike Moss, my neighbor. Mike lives about 10 miles from me. We get together for coffee now and then, not gin, coffee. Mike is the president of SCUP, which is the Society for College and University Planning. He's been there for 10 years. Prior to this role, he had 30 years in nonprofit and association management across all kinds of industries, two state associations, 2 international associations. And SCUP has 4,000 academic budget and facility planning leaders across higher education. And so all 3 great guests, and I could tell cohorts for you and increasingly confidants and cohorts for me. I've enjoyed them.
Yeah, they are. And listening to your intro of all of them, when you think about associations, it's not only the members that they're serving, but the millions of students that the members impact from what they learn, what they take away, and how they move in the industry. So I think the association impact is micro and macro in everything that they do. And I think that comes out in this conversation in some ways.
Well, I love that actually each of those associations describes themselves in the context of how many students are served. I mean, in other words, the association's mission isn't just, it is the members, they're serving the professionals, but they haven't forgotten that the professionals are serving the students. I really like that they include students in the description of what they're all about.
Yeah. And I think that's where this conversation sums up the research and the work that everyone is doing for students. We do this for the students, but how are we taking care of the employees that do the work for the students to make the positive impact?
Right. Yeah. And in this episode, there were 2 things that really stand out. One is this whole notion of unlearning to relearn and this moment that we're in. And the second is that I think these 3 association leaders view themselves as having to recalibrate what the associations do for those members. They talked a little bit about how, because campus leaders are just so busy and they appreciate that and are attuned to that associations may need to do more for campus leaders who just don't have the time to be looking around the corner, as one of the guests said, look around the corner at what's coming. So they've got to do more for those members. And I really appreciate that they're really tuned into how life on the campus is complicated.
Yep. So let's listen in, hear what they have to say. Well, here we are for another episode of Campus Confidential.
Here we are.
How are you doing today, Loren? Oh, wait, I'm not supposed to ask you that. We already did it in the intro.
Did we? Well, I'm going to tell you anyways. I'm doing great. I'm actually at Georgia Tech. I just got done moderating a panel, having a good time. Nice to see you all.
Awesome. That's fun. Moderate a panel, do a podcast, jack of all trades in one day.
Yeah. It's all good.
We're here for a party podcast. We have 3 guests, which is exciting. And one of our guests, it's their birthday today. So while we're recording, so we won't say the date we're recording because for privacy purposes, I guess.
Probably important. It's HIPAA or FERPA or something. I don't know. Yeah.
It's something, right? But Mary, we thank you for being here on your birthday. Super excited to have you.
Thanks. Delighted to be here.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday. And we have Pam and Mike joining us as well. So we're just going to jump right in. We've been going through a series on leadership, and these 3 lovely individuals and their associations agreed to do the leadership study on employees in higher education with E15. So would love to hear from the 3 of you kind of why you agreed to participate in the leadership study and what it meant for your associations to say yes to talk about employee satisfaction right now. So Mary, since it's your birthday, we're going to start with you.
Well, thanks, Kelsey and Loren. One of the reasons I said yes is because Kelsey asked. And when Kelsey asked, I usually say yes.
She has that effect on people.
Really,
yes.
It's great to be in such great company. Pam and Mike, ACUHO-I, NIRSA, and SCUP, we collaborate on a lot of things, or we at least try to find ways that we can connect. So being in good company was a wonderful, easy way to say yes. I think the other thing is that ACUHO-I is doing similar research. We're not doing the exact same questions, but we have leadership questions embedded in our research. And so it was really interesting for us to find out, where are we similar? Where are we different? Is campus housing so different from the rest of the academy, or are we all really facing the same problems as society is facing when it comes to, employee retention, employee satisfaction?
Love it. How about Pam? What would you add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I would echo and underscore everything Mary said. I think the one thing I would add too is we were really intrigued by this idea of solving some of the challenges we were all seeing in higher ed. Was the solutions tied to leadership competencies, and where leadership competencies may need to evolve, may not need to evolve, what that meant for pipeline and professional development. And then, of course, as associations, what could we be doing to support that? But that premise we had before, designing the study around, we could all name the challenges, but was the solution tied somehow to leadership competencies, was really intriguing to us. And yeah, like Mary said, doing it with these three organizations, where are we the same? Where are we different? I think also we were very, very curious about that as well.
Awesome. Yeah. The competencies piece is huge. How about you, Mike? What would you add to that?
Yeah, same on a lot of that, including just doing what Kelsey tells me, because I do think the directions that she's provided over the years we've known each other have always been spot on. And I think that what I would add to what my colleagues have said is that one of the most important pieces of SCUP's work is that we recognize that we're the horizontal planning organization, not just the vertical of a strategic plan. And in working with non-traditional audiences for our members, such as NIRSA, ACUHO-I, and others, it really does start to meet the pledge of what we're supposed to be doing, which is systemic thinking and planning through people to address change. And obviously, the biggest piece of part of all that is the workforce and making sure that we recognize that. So while we're not mission-centric to workforce development, we certainly recognize that in the absence of that, good luck with any of your planning in any way. And so we want to be a participant in the opportunity for movement as opposed to just the recipient of change over time.
Well, and your members are sitting within the ecosystem, I think that's the right word, ecosystem that they are planning for. So they are part of the employee experience, and they are solving for the employee experience, the student experience, the community experience. The list goes on, right?
Absolutely. Yep, absolutely. And I think to add just to one of the serendipitous moments of this study that came forward was that at the same time, we put forward a strategic plan that commits us to being a learning-centric organization by design, not by intent. And so the association itself has to redesign itself to represent, as we just described for the campus, we must represent that within our own community and within our own team here at SCUP.
Mary, you mentioned maybe some curiosity about whether there were differences in populations of employees, colleagues on campus. I wonder, when each of you are looking at these data, or maybe what you're experiencing yourself of members, how would you characterize what you're hearing from your members, or what did you find in the research results that surprised you or maybe confirmed what you're hearing? Pam, maybe, or Mary, maybe start with you, since you raised that question a little bit, and then we'll hear from others.
Yeah, I think that it was amazing how aligned the research ACUHO-I has done and the research project that this has, how aligned the responses were. I mean, overwhelming, pay is especially a concern for our folks, especially when you're talking about people who are entering the field and then managers. We ask that they have a graduate degree. We ask that they have years of experience. When you look at that kind of criteria that we ask for in the pay compared to what the open market is willing to pay, the delta is significant. So I think pay is certainly something that we saw, and it just continues to come up. I mean, and it's starting to come up even amongst our most senior people who traditionally have been, well paid. So I think that that's something that is not going away. And I have to say, in some ways, I talked a little bit about the education, et cetera, but it's sort of also the generation. folks are no longer willing to do things only because they're passionate about it. They really want to be paid for their skills, their competency, the effort they're putting into it. And I think that higher education really is going to have to look at the business model to accommodate that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Pam, Mike, did you find the same kind of thing as you looked at those data, or did other things pop for you?
Yeah, I think that I 100% agree with Mary that, pay has to be addressed first. And, we see other things come through the survey, but you always have to address pay first, and then you can get after the other things. I think, so a lot of it was confirming. I think it was surprising to us how deep it seemed to go, and that this wasn't temporary. Right. So, all of us are old enough that we were managing organizations through the last recession. And, there were similar challenges that popped up, particularly around, budget and being asked to do different things and things like that. But I think we all knew it was temporary. We just had to, manage our way through it and get to the other side. This doesn't feel temporary, right? What Mary described about what, the workforce wants in terms of a rewarding, profession or career, that balance or integration maybe is a better word of work and life. This isn't temporary. These are permanent sentiments, if you will, permanent changes to context and expectations for work. And so I think that part felt different. That was one of the things I took away from the survey.
Yeah. Yeah. Your point about how deep it went, I was a little surprised in some ways how seasoned people were that were feeling this way. These are people with master's degrees, to your point, Mary, many of whom have graduate degrees. I think I expected maybe earlier career or sort of preponderance of early career or something, but I was a little surprised by, these are folks who have been at this a while and are beginning to reflect on whether they want to stay with it a while. So, I was, the deep thing was kind of resonating with me too. How about you, Mike? Anything to add to that?
No, yeah, I would agree with all that. And especially, I think that was the surprise that we had in looking at it was the alignment across the entire academy towards these issues, which does, to Pam's point, this is here now. This isn't going to be a temporary crisis-driven thing. This is a recognition of a systemic opportunity for change. And I think, Brian Alexander is somebody that we really treasure in our community at SCUP. And it's in the report, too. It keeps coming out that we might have to do less with less, which means, a few less people making more to the point of compensation. We do have to take some non-traditional approaches, perhaps, to really do the right thing for the people who are doing the good work that we all know matters. And I think the other piece that was a little surprising was I appreciate in the report that we haven't resigned yet to the devaluing of higher ed, but we are all worried about it. And I think having the three communities openly feel comfortable to state that was welcomed and does give optimism towards the fact that we will start to work together on this as a community, as opposed to one campus fits in spurts. I do think we're going to see a much wider effort. And so I wasn't maybe surprised, but pleased to see that level of openness and alignment in the report between our three communities.
That's right. Quality over quantity in some ways, and being very clear. I think we're past the every campus can be all things for all people. It's getting real clear about what you're providing and why you're providing it, and then the quality over quantity. So that leads me to think, as associations, I think there's this push and pull between being the leader of the industry change or the follower of the way the industry is changing. And it feels like there's this push and pull as associations and as association boards think about strategy and where they want to head. So what kind of conversations are you all having as associations? Where do you lead? Where do you follow? Where do you push? Where do you wait? Disrupt. Yeah, I think that's a great point. Have you all spent time on that? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and I'll just, with full attribution, one of our colleagues, Melanie, who runs ACUHO, she said to us all at a meeting last December that she feels like, and I agree with this, our members are so busy right now, they don't have time to pick their heads up and look around the corner. And so we as associations right now have to do it for them. And, I've been with NIRSA almost 20 years now, right? And in this association space. And I think there's been times where the members they're really out in front and leading, and we are, in lockstep with them, but they're really driving the conversation around what's next and what do we need to get ready for. And then there are times with whatever else is going on in higher ed where, man, their brains are full, their heads are full, right? Looking down, trying to take care of their day job. And so we have to be the ones looking around the corner a little bit more, still with the members and the leaders, of course, right? In conversation with our leaders. But I think we're having to do more of the work to connect the dots and help them get to solutions right now. And I do think that, I don't think that is here to stay. I do think that will ebb and flow, but I think the strong associations know when to step up, right? That pull, Kelsey, that you were talking about, and when can we, take a little step back.
So that speaks to me of changing competencies. So how are you changing competencies of your volunteer leaders that come from campuses, changing competencies of the staff that work for the associations? What are you thinking about when it comes to kind of that employee volunteer leadership world?
So if I could offer, at SCUP, we just put together the planning competencies, right? And the picture on the cover is a honeycomb, so I'm just going to call it the honeycomb because that's how we're going to see it. But with that honeycomb of competencies, I think what's really cool and why it brings me back to what Mary and Pam are doing is that we recognize that the vast majority of the competencies in this matrix to make planning effective are not the core competencies of the SCUP community itself. And to Pam's point, what we have to recognize is that it isn't just about partnership and occasional partnership on or collaborations on papers anymore. It's about the associations meaningfully changing how they address the competency development for those they serve. So in our case, it's that game of Red Rover. We've got to lock arms and we've got to keep the change from getting through, right? And really working really intentionally through the competency development, which leads to different alignments in how we're going to have to bring the training forward. And I think, there's a million different ways to partner and there's a million ways not to partner. And we have to be real intentional to be focused on how that works, which competencies really do have ownership within one of the acronyms and which ones don't, and being willing to send people to the other businesses to get the competencies to solve the overall higher ed systemic challenges and not just within certain silos or certain domains by which we've traditionally served. 46 associations walking together changes everything.
46, is that the number?
That's my memory of the CHIMA, but I could be corrected on that easily.
No, I feel like that's a big number.
Do you all have the fact check session? I don't know.
No, we don't have fact check. We just go with what you all say. 46 is it.
Okay.
I'm good with it.
And CHIMA for our listeners is what?
The Council for Higher Education Management Associations.
Yeah. And, so I think what I hear you saying, Mike, is to, your point, Kelsey, you can't be all things to all people. I think what I hear you saying is among the constellation of associations that serve higher education, support higher education, we don't have to do all of those things. We just have to know where people can get that, right? I'm wondering, and Mary, you were talking earlier about graduate degrees and pay and experience. Do you think maybe as higher ed changes and questions, do we need graduate degrees for every job, that associations will step in to fill some of the things that might have typically come from that? Do you imagine that associations will do some of the trend analysis that we might have, I'm hearing your point, Pam, about looking around the corner. I couldn't agree more. I mean, I remember my days on campus. There was always this tension I felt between volunteer and staff-driven associations. I love staff-driven. I didn't have time, and I loved what associations brought. So I'm wondering if you see a shift in associations doing what typically employees might have done for themselves, get a master's degree, or universities might have done instead of associations, compensation analysis. Do you see that happening in associations?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we all do our own compensation studies so that, folks could benchmark against what their peers are doing. I would also add that, at ACUHO-I, we're not only looking at CHIMA to see what others are doing and how to use competencies, et cetera, but we're looking outside higher education because I think some of our solutions are going to have to come from outside of the academy. When we think about the workforce and what are the competencies that they need. For so long, it has been that higher ed degree, at least in the space of campus housing, and it has been a master's degree. But now we have universities where instead of a master's degree in higher ed, it might be somebody who has a master's degree in social work. It might be somebody who was a K-12 teacher, because it's really about the transferable skills. I believe that we can teach the situation. What we want when we're hiring are people who have these skills that can come in and utilize them, to make the business more effective, make it more efficient, to make sure that, we're still giving that level of care, but also thinking about what are some of the different ways of doing things. We're not alone in any of our businesses. I mean, you could look at campus housing and we might be equivalent to, residential facilities for all sorts of type of people, right? Who need to be able to have the skills to de-escalate, to manage conflict, to do all the things that our folks in residence life do. In Pam's space, there's certainly a whole other world outside of campus recreation. There's a whole industry of recreation sport, right? And the same thing for Mike's business. So I think that we have to be able to lift our heads up as an association and say, we're going to bring in something from outside of the academy and test it out, and test it with one or two people, or get a group of people together and sort of, do a beta and say, what works, what doesn't, and take some risk. Because if we don't take risks, we're going to be right where we are now, and we'll never move forward to where we want to be.
Yeah. I remember I said I was going to go to the airport experience conference, and everyone was like, what are you doing? And I was like, because if you think about airports, who else wants to get people through food lines faster? Who else wants to move people through spaces, get in and out and do different things? It's like, I feel like if they do it efficiently, we could learn some things.
You kind of live the airport experience now, Kelsey.
I do now. It's just a very different experience. I'm not sure they had it figured out. And they're one industry that move a lot slower than higher education. I did learn that part too, which was quite interesting. So we're talking a lot about competencies, transferable skills, 100%. So what are some of the competencies that you all, what's in this honeycomb, Mike? What's in your strategic plans? What are the competencies that you're calling out as critical for now?
So I think the three that I aligned certainly to the research that we're referencing is effective leadership, healthy culture, and enhanced communications. But just saying that, great. That's fantastic, Mike. Thank you so much for the help. And I think that's where we have to, Mary and Pam's point, that's the place where we have to push further. What really is effective leadership? What really does that look like within the culture of every campus that has to define its own cultures and enculturate planning and all the things that it does differently to serve the community they serve? And when we talk about enhanced communications, I think all of us have experienced this in our career where you do an employee survey, the number one thing that needs to improve is communications, and you go all in. And next year you run the same survey, and the number thing that needs to improve is communications, and you go all in. And it's really, really hard. But if we get past the context and get into the application of the competencies, that's where all these collaborations that my colleagues are referencing really starts to be different. So instead of highlighting the names of the competencies, it's the outcomes of the aligned competencies. And then how do you build that into your enculturated campus, I think is what we're talking about. And I do think the drivers for change are very well stated in this report. The next challenge is for the associations then to address, that midstream alignment of systems and people, not just the visions and the strategies, right? So start to really move into the midstream alignment so that at the downstream point of execution, they know who the SCUPers are on their campus. They know who the NIRSA members are on their campus. And it's not an up and over. It's a I know exactly where to go moment for everybody to execute. Yeah,
Mike, I'm really glad to hear you say that because like Mary said earlier, recreation exists in a lot of spaces outside of higher ed. And so, I hear stories from my members, well, they'll bring in folks, right, from, let's say, the local fitness studio or whatever, and they've got this great vision and new ideas, and especially around revenue generation. And after a year, they quit because the structures around them won't let them do that good work they were hired to bring in and do. There's structures around them that are shutting down, the entrepreneurialism or the new ways of thinking about revenue generation, et cetera. And so it's got to be this both and, you've probably seen it. I've also seen this happen on boards. Oh, we really want a really, really diverse board, or we want a really, really diverse staff, whatever the grouping is. And you bring in that diverse person perspective, identities, whatever that is in that circumstance. And you basically take, a square peg and you try and mash it into a round hole, right? Your culture, just stamps it all out, right? And they either just become another one of you or they leave. So yeah, we can have these words on a page and these competencies and what have you, but we have to do that systems and culture work to make sure that, those talents, those new perspectives can actually be applied.
In your experience, or based on what you hear from members and colleagues, are those systems and structures departmental generally, or institutional generally, or something else generally?
Institutional. Yeah. And
is there a role, do you think, for associations in disrupting the things that make it difficult for the people doing the work? Is there a role that you've thought about?
Yeah. And it's not, it's not a new role for associations, right? I think one of the things we're good at is bringing, energy and attention and spotlight to new and innovative ideas, right? Actually, one of the best things about higher ed, I think, is that the tipping point is only like 3 or 4 schools. It's not 20 or 30 schools, right? Doing something. And I think sometimes we can say things that our members can't. So I think finding that school or that example or that opportunity out there where they aren't getting hampered by structures, and then bringing a lot of attention to that is a good way that associations can advocate.
We talk a lot about systems and structures, but I'd also put out there that sometimes I think we're our own worst enemy. And what I mean by that is we have leaders who have been around for a long time, and they have certainly earned the spot as the top person, in their unit. But I think they also hold mental models that are what it was like to be in a lower position or to be in a junior position, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, maybe even 7 or 8 years ago. And the world has changed so much. The students that we're serving are very different. The pressures that universities have are very different today than they were. And if our leaders have these mental models that are outdated, it's really hard for those people who are the entrepreneurs, the mid-level managers, et cetera, to go in and innovate and take risks because they're shut down. And we all know it doesn't matter if you're in higher ed or not. If you don't have a little bit of that innovation and creativity as part of your work experience, it's not very fulfilling. And so, sometimes I think, we could do more to help our senior leaders see that there is more wiggle room than we give them credit for having.
Yeah, such a good point. Rewarding longevity over productivity, creativity, innovation is probably not going to get us where we want to go. So great point.
Yeah, the whole time equals competency, or that there. I don't think that equation works out as much. So it makes me think, Loren, in some of our other conversations through this series, we've had some folks talk about having to unlearn, right? So unlearn our own personal habits, and I think this is the point maybe, Mary, you were going down too, right? It's like, wait, this is how it was when I was in this role, and maybe everyone needs to put in the time and effort, and why should they be able to do it differently than I did it, or whatever stories we put in our heads as leaders as we move up and over throughout organizations. So unlearning, it then makes me think of a question for you all is, how are you leading by examples? The 3 of you are executives in major associations. You've been in those roles for a number of years. So I'm assuming you've maybe had to unlearn and relearn some things. So would love a little bit of insights to you as individual leaders. What have you had to unlearn? What are you doing to lead by example through some of these changing times?
Well, one of the challenges to myself, this is like probably started maybe 2 years ago, where I would get up and think about my day or my week or my month, and I would say, okay, if I was brand new to NIRSA, if they had just hired me last week, what would I see? What would I do? And this is no joke. The other mental model I have is, if Mike Moss or Mary DeNiro took my job, what would they do? Like, what would they see, right? Because they have different talents than I have, right? And where would, if Mary and I swap jobs, like, what would I do at ACUHO-I and what would she do at NIRSA, right? And I try to think about that, right? Same thing with Mike, right? He's career association management, one of the, most innovative thinkers I know. What would Mike do, right, for NIRSA right now? So that, I don't know, that's how I try to challenge my mental models, because I've been at this for a while, and oh my gosh, I don't want to be one of those people you all are talking about that needs to just move along.
Is there something you've done differently, like something you've done as you've thought through that process?
Let me think on that for a minute.
She listens to Metallica now.
Yeah.
If I've only done one thing in my career.
I think, lots of things. I mean, I think with Mike, it's like, be fearless and innovating and trying different things. Like, that's what I read from you, Mike. Like, be fearless,
nice.
Right? And getting after that. And Mary, with you, I think it's always looking like strategically and systemically and long term. You've been a part of changing industries in other parts of your career, and I just find that so valuable, right? And then it's the conversation with both of them about unpacking things and trying to repackage them.
Love it. Mike or Mary, do you have anything you're unlearning besides everything? Sometimes that might be the answer.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And Pam, thank you for the nice comments, and that's very meaningful. And I think, Kelsey, to one of your points about the airport conference, is that in order to unlearn and to relearn and to really challenge how we approach things at SCUP, we've gotten to the point where many of us just go form our own mastermind groups or other collectives of thinkers from multiple industries. So being fortunate enough to have been 33 years in association management, you meet some folks. And with those folks, some of them just challenge you every time you pick up the phone in beautiful ways. But learning to recognize that that's a beautiful opportunity and not a frustration took me some time. And I think as I've gotten, we'll call it seasoned, versus older. I really appreciate that, and now really put together several different groups that meet quarterly in order to challenge just the state of the industry of associations, state of the industry of how we apply to the 2030s and beyond. And that's been really helpful to see things differently, and then come back, as Pam noted, and kind of look at your association and go, what do we need to unlearn? So learning from all the other industries that are also under their own versions of duress. And how that might apply to higher ed and SCUP.
Love it. How about you, Mary? Anything?
During COVID, there were groups of us, like Mike said, little mastermind groups who got together. And I don't know that there was a lot of masterminding going on. I think there was a lot of crying in our beer about contracts and some other things, at least for the first part of it. But
those hotel contracts, they were fun conversations.
That's right. But it was in one of those groups, and I think it may have even been Pam. We were talking, and we came to the conclusion that we just really needed to think like we're a startup. As opposed to being an organization that has such long history and tradition, we need to think like we're a startup, and be gritty and try new things. And if it doesn't work, then stop doing it. Partner with other people. Think about resources in a way that I think, at least for us at ACUHO-I, 2019 was still the golden age of associations. We had a lot of resources. We were able to spend money in ways that I think we were good stewards of the money, but we had more options. When the pandemic hit, we really had to get down and dirty and really make some hard choices about what to do, what not to do. And in a lot of ways, it felt really good because it was this startup, this entrepreneurial approach that we kind of had to do, but we were able to start a lot of things that we probably would have never started if this hadn't happened. And we stopped some things, which I don't know that we could have ever stopped. Probably not enough.
Well, we would have had a committee, a $50,000 consultant in 18 months, right? Before we decided to stop something.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Mary, I mean, I think that's brilliantly said. I mean, it became really clear what structures were serving us and what structures were not serving us. And at least in the pandemic, we could ignore or get rid of those structures that weren't serving us. And now the trick is to not let them creep back, right? Like in NIRSA, one of the things I've been talking about, and I stole this from PCMA, one of the meeting planner associations, is they said, stop comparing yourself to pre-pandemic. That's not the goal, to go back to pre-pandemic. How many of us look at our numbers, our membership numbers, our financial numbers, our conference numbers? Well, compared to pre-pandemic, they're like, just stop. So we've stopped, right? I mean, occasionally behind the scenes, do I lecture? But like as a talking point, as the main metric, that is not the main metric. The business model looks different. The participation numbers look different. The ways people participate, even like Mike was alluding to earlier, what partnerships and collaborations are going to look like is different. So stop, the metric is not pre-pandemic.
I mentioned in an earlier episode, I had read some article about how the difference when you look at pandemic, some people will look at it as an interruption, and we'll get back to what that was at some point. Others view it as a disruption, and those are the folks who are innovating for the future, to your point. I am wondering if you were to view it as a disruption, the pandemic as a disruption, or what's going on as disruptive, and you look out 10 years, what do you think the higher ed community needs to know or do? Or you mentioned some competencies, Mike, but what are the things where do we need to look for guidance? What do we need to know about 10 years from now that is probably disruptive, maybe related to pandemic or not, so that folks can get preparing their minds and their competencies and actions for that kind of future? It's a little broad, but I mean that intentionally.
I think the first thing that comes to mind is that I think in concept, we've always accepted the speed of change is beyond what we can meet on a daily basis, and we can't see that as concept anymore. And so, as an association, for example, we have a pretty well-established SME community that does every so often updates of content for all the right reasons. But in the intermediary now between our two normally scheduled updates, there's been 15 disruptions on every campus from the external environment that no one saw coming. And they have to respond now for their students. They can't wait till we get around to it in our normal constructs of learning as a higher ed adjacent organization. So I think it's conceptual, but it's not. The speed of change is never going back. It is only going faster. And it can be tech influenced or people influenced, but it's all going to go faster. And I think we also have to acknowledge, particularly as that supportive agencies that we are as associations to higher ed, that when the higher ed and our most valued community is being criticized for cost, what are we doing to allow our constituents to have better access and affordability to the solutions that we offer? And making sure that we are aligned and we are part of the same ecosystem, to Kelsey's earlier term. That with that, it's at the 10 years out, we've all done it together. We haven't done it in spite of or in absence of. We've done it together. And that is the adjacent plus the actual higher ed community together in response to change in real time constantly. That is an operating norm now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the future is shared. The future is shared, right?
Thank you. Yeah.
Anything to add, Pam or Mary, to looking 10 years out, how we need to get ready?
I think we need to look at the students who are, in second, third, fourth grade now, and what's what their parents are thinking about. What are the anxiety their parents have? What are the things they're really excited about? Because students will bring those all the way through to their first and second and third year and towards completion of their university degree. I think that's where the real change is that we're going to see is what our students demand from us is going to be different. I don't necessarily know what that looks like, but do our residence hall meet the needs that they have? We're already seeing that students don't want to live with other students. Well, how do we transcend, students don't want to live with each other or share a double or triple or a quad at some universities, to the cost of building new residence halls. That's pretty, we have to figure out ways to fill those gaps. And I think that understanding what that next generation wants, needs, what their parents want and need, what they're going to be able to afford, to Mike's point, the accessibility, the safety issues, those are all things that I think are just going to get exacerbated, not necessarily in a bad way, but they're just going to look different.
That's awesome, Mary. And it made me think of, and what I might add to your question, Loren, is that what can we do to be 10 years ready and to have that shared future together, is stop treating professional development as discretionary funds. Is that every employee, regardless of staff, faculty, first-time employee, 17,000 years on the job like me, you have a 3-year guaranteed funded PD path towards wherever it is that the institution needs you to go and you would like to go. And it is the last thing cut under duress. That is a commitment to your talent in a structure that says you've now enculturated to be change ready together. And I think that is a huge shift for most organizations, to have that mindset of permanent investment in talent.
Yeah, you may have heard that's saying, what if I invest in my people? What if I spend all this money and they leave? And it's like, well, what if you don't spend any money and they stay? I mean, that's even worse, right? So.
And it's how are we thinking about it as a system? I think some of the conversations we've been having too is thinking about people aren't equipped or staying in jobs for 20, 30 years. I mean, I'm a perfect example of that, right? We've moved along doing different things. And I think, well, if you think about higher ed as a system, if we think about associations as a whole system, it's like, well, then we're contributing to a better system. If we're continually providing learning opportunities, people are growing in competencies, then even if someone leaves your organization, the person coming into your organization hopefully has those competencies, and we're lifting everybody up together. And how are we thinking about that in a global sense versus what's mine is mine and what's yours is yours, and you have to worry about you and I have to worry about me, versus how are we benefiting the collective when we think about the competencies of the future for employees in higher education, and I think employees working in associations as well.
Yeah, Mike, I love what you just said about the 3-year horizon for professional development. We do it with our strategic plans. I won't let our board vote on something without the resources that will carry it for 3 years. We need to take that down into our staffs, and that addresses employee satisfaction in many ways. It addresses motivation. I mean, many of the things that were measured in this survey, all of a sudden, our staff and our employees know that we really care about them, and we're in it for the long term with them.
Well, we are bumping up against the time that we end the episode, and I guess I just want to say a few things, not the least of which is thank you, but not just for this episode. You all lead so magnificently, and as a client, as a campus person, before I moved to this side of the table, I needed what you and your associations have offered. I know Kelsey feels very similarly, and Kelsey also was an association CEO, and I needed what NACUS offered. So I want to thank you on behalf of a lot of people who've learned a lot from each of you and from the associations. And then the things you offered today, lifting our heads up as associations and as folks adjacent to higher education to help people on campus so we can look around the corner, that we can oftentimes be our own worst enemy, that the systems and structures we create as people sometimes get in the way of the very things we'd like to accomplish, that it's important, Pam, to stop looking backwards to pre-pandemic and to look about where we need to be and what we're, compare ourselves to the new reality that is post-pandemic. The competencies, Mike, I don't know if I got them down quickly enough, but effective leadership and healthy relationships and enhancing communication, excellent stuff. And then finally, Kelsey, I loved your question, and it makes me think about what I need to unlearn and how important it is to unlearn so that we can relearn, reminding us of that too. So thank you for your time today, what you do in the association world and what you do for so many of us, really, whether we're still in or adjacent to higher education. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. It's very kind.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Loren, are you ready for end of season 2? Extra credit?
I'm ready for season 3. That's what I'm mostly ready for.
I am ready for season 3 as well. So we are gonna take a little break. Breaks are allowed. We're gonna take a little break. Summer break.
Let's just call it a wellness break. That's it.
Wellness break for August. But we've talked a lot about kind of the first season, our storytelling from leaders and their great impacts on the work they're doing. Season 2, we really focused on the leadership research and how to make an impact. What are you thinking about for season 3? What are we going to do?
Yeah, we got such great feedback from season 1 and really season 2, but it was so fun to talk with leaders about their own journeys that, I think going back to that a little bit, although as we've talked about, more topically driven, I think will be great. So talking with individual leaders about their stories, but maybe, for example, tell us about a time you did something, fill in the blank. And, I think we'd love to hear from even listeners. What are the things you'd like to get advice or story or history or perspective on topically? Because that's going to be how we approach season 3. And I think that's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, agreed. And topically, so we can dive a little deeper, because the other piece that we heard that I would add to that is you just started to scratch the surface on something. And it's like, but we want to know more, like what happened after that incident and how do they follow up on that? So we're going to put a call out to all you fans. We need to come up with a name. I feel like everyone with fans or listeners has a name.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm going to have to work on that. I was about to suggest one, but no.
I know. My brain was like starting to think of words. I'm like, anything I say right now could be not appropriate. So I'm not even going to try. But we would love to hear from you, people that have great stories that you want to hear from, or topics that you want to know more about or us to dive deeper in. Maybe something you're struggling with that you would love to hear from someone else. So we'll put a call out on our LinkedIn page. Y'all probably know how to get a hold of Loren and I. So message us. Tell us what you want to hear.
By way of example, just to put one out, I've been thinking a lot about, tell us about a time you've failed and what you learned from it. Because it's just part of leadership. You're going to fail at something. So what are the kinds of topics or issues or perspectives? Yeah, that's one. And then who? I think to your point, that's another great session. Is like, and then who would you suggest we talk with? Yeah.
Yep. So we're here. Hope you all have a great rest of your summer and start to your academic year. And we'll be back in September. Woo.
Sounds good.
All right.
Campus Confidential is presented by Compass Group, produced by Corey Inscoe, with your hosts Kelsey Harmon Finn and Loren Rullman.